From 2Keto LLC, it's Keto Woman Podcast with Daisy Brackenhall.
Hello, Keto Lovelies. I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. Keto has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman Podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs to 20 grams or less per day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds, and the incidental carbs you find in things like dairy. Moderate protein scaled to your lean body mass, and then fat to satiety. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalised keto. I'll be asking my guest each week what their keto looks like to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we can't give you medical advice. It's always best to work with your own doctor because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Thank you, Trish Roberts, for supporting me and this podcast by making a pledge at my Patreon page. Do you want to hear your name here at the top of the show? Are you enjoying this podcast and would like to help me make more episodes? Then head to my Patreon page at patreon.com/KetoWoman, or hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It means a great deal to me, and you'll get to headline the show just like Trish did today. This week's extraordinary woman is Caryn Zinn. Dr. Caryn Zinn is a New Zealand registered dietitian and a senior lecturer at AUT University in New Zealand. Her research and clinical practice work focuses on the whole food, low carbohydrate, healthy fat nutrition approach and its application to metabolic health and sports performance. Caryn has 22 years of consulting experience as a dietitian. She is also a co-author of 3 books: What the Fat? Fats In, Sugars Out; What the Fat? Sports Performance; and her most recent one, What the Fast? I had such an interesting time talking to Caryn. She is one busy, extraordinary woman, and I loved her down-to-earth, holistic approach to her work and her own life. I could have gone on for hours chatting, but she has promised to come back and do another podcast in the future. So let me know what you would like to hear her talk about next. Welcome, Caryn, to the Keto Woman Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Daisy. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. We're top and tailing it with ends of the day because you're in New Zealand and I'm in France, so we're opposite sides of the world, aren't we?
We are, and I'm all fresh and ready to go, and you're probably a bit tired from a full day.
I am. I'm heading to bed, and you're just getting started. Wonderful. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your training and what led you to low carb and your nutrition practice and all the things you do now today?
Right. So I'm a registered dietitian, and I have been a dietitian for 23 or 24 years now, I think. And I originate from South Africa, from Cape Town, and I trained there as a dietitian. And interestingly, it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, what I grew up dreaming about doing. I went to university to do science because that's what I thought was interesting, with no idea what I was going to come out with at the end of it. And then did a Bachelor of Science degree at University of Cape Town, UCT, and and then after the Bachelor of Science, I did a postgraduate degree in nutrition and dietetics, also at UCT, and then registered as a dietitian, and then promptly hopped over to a different country, came to New Zealand, and I worked in public health actually for about 4 years. So I went from Cape Town, which is a nice big city, to a little place called Whangarei, which has a population of about 160,000 people. So a little town in comparison.
What made you make that move from South Africa to New Zealand?
Oh, I'm actually going to say this on air. I followed a boy. Well, I came with my partner at the time as a bit of an adventure, and I guess my original thoughts were, if I hate it, I'll go home. Mm-hmm. So, and you know, that's really the long and the short of it. So, 4 years in this little town, and then I sort of fell into academia with my naivety, I'll have to say, because I thought, I'll apply for this job because I really like teaching. So I applied for the job at AUT in Auckland, moved down to Auckland, got the job, and then realized that universities were all about research. So I had to continue studying, which was absolutely fine. So I did a master's, and the area of my master's was sports nutrition. And then I did a PhD, and the area was around weight loss, or losing weight and keeping it off long-term, weight loss maintenance. So the study continued, and I mean, I'll have to be honest, study always continues. Even though I formally finished my degrees and my letters and my numbers and whatever, study is just continuing all the time. So you have to embrace it, whichever way you look at it, formally or informally. So that was my training. And I guess like all other dietitians that went through training back then, or even now, I'll have to say, it was very mainstream nutrition that was communicated to us, and it's interesting because I think it was maturity that gave me an inquiring mind. I certainly wasn't one of those kids who grew up going, why is the moon round, and why is this and why is that? I just accepted stuff. And I continued to accept stuff when I went to university. I just, they taught us about the nutrition guidelines, and I felt no reason to question what they were telling us, because those were the professors and the tutors, and I was a 20-year-old student with nothing in life, apart from 20 years of growing up. So who was I to question these things? And those years and that training really laid the foundation for my nutrition knowledge, which translated into nutrition practice and nutrition research. So, like everyone, I went through my years basing all my teachings and all my understandings on, the trusty food pyramid, healthy whole grains, lots of carbohydrate. And actually, when I first came across the macronutrient ratio proportions and guidelines, carbohydrate was 55 to 70% of total energy. It's dropped now to around 45 to 65%. I mean, it's dropped a smidgen, but it used to be higher, and fat used to be even lower. And over the last 20 years, I mean, it's taken a seriously long time, but over the years, the carbohydrate guidelines have dropped a smidgen, and the fat guidelines have been tweaked a little bit, but it's still, it doesn't play out like that when you look at what's in the supermarket and what people eat. Still eat very high carb, very low fat.
So presumably, having been in the field for quite a long time, you've seen changes in your approach and your recommendations to your clients, have you?
Oh, absolutely.
You haven't been low carb for all that time.
No, in fact, I've only been low carb for a very short space of time in my career, and it was only about 6 years ago that I changed my practice, and it was a very it was a very unsettling time for me, I must be honest. When you are a dietitian and you are a registered dietitian, no matter what job you have, whether it's public health or academia or private practice or food service or whatever, you still governed by those foundations. And that's sort of, the basis of everything. And when I got wind of the controversy to the extent that I did 6 years ago, it really rocked my foundations, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to leave dietetics because I actually don't know what to do with this information. And I really believe that this whole journey has to do with experience as a dietitian and maturity as a person and as a dietitian, because I certainly came across this before. The Atkins diet. I was all over that information in the. I guess it first came about late 80s, was it? No, maybe a bit later. And I distinctly remember teaching my students that ketosis is dangerous and that low carb diet, pros and cons, heart disease, tick, bad breath, tick, nutritional ketosis, tick, dangerous. So, and I could probably still find the slide somewhere. In those days it was overhead transparencies. I believe that my students believe me because they did, to a certain extent, what I did as a student, and it was just believe what you were told, and this is sad but true. But students often go through their study by doing the minimum extra work. You've got your lecture notes, and you might have a reading or two, and that's it. Unless you have an assignment where you actually look at the depth of information around an area, you just accept. So my students were just accepting what I was saying, and then Atkins just kind of went off my radar. And then, interestingly, during my PhD, which is only around 2011-ish, 2012, I came across, because it was all about weight loss, I came across some studies that included, a low carb arm, and it just sort of dropped off dropped out of my head. I didn't acknowledge it. It was just this non-entity. It was like it didn't exist. And it's interesting because it's only when you come out of it and you have a more holistic view can you see how narrow-minded and particularly how arrogant, that is, to just ignore stuff because of the foundations that you've got, rather than entertain the idea and read more about it. And then it came back, probably, yes, about 6 years ago, and that's when I couldn't get away from it, and that's the time that I totally changed my mind. Yeah.
And so presumably before that time you were just working within the typical guidelines.
Yes, absolutely. So in my academic world, the research that we would do would be all about if it was weight loss, it was about calorie restriction, and it was about portion control. And instead of having 3 cups of pasta, you have 2.5 cups of pasta. And instead of having, a tablespoon of butter, you have a teaspoon of margarine, or even better, a spray of, canola oil. And it was all in that context. And of course, in my practice, it was also in that context. But I have to say one thing that might surprise some of your listeners is that it did work for a lot of people, high carb, low fat, calorie control absolutely works. But it works at the expense of several things. So number one, it works at the expense of being hungry consistently. It works because you are in calorie deficit. So of course you are going to lose weight. You are consuming less calories than your body needs, so you will lose weight. And it comes with a healthy dose of over-exercising, I have to say. So it was during that time where you are just focused on results rather than what goes hand in hand with getting those results that sort of made you continue. And once again, it's only when things are done differently, like now, do you see that actually weight loss is purely just a bonus with everything else that comes with low carb. And, yes, you are still in a calorie deficit and we can talk a little bit more about energy balance, because I still think it's absolutely relevant when it comes to weight loss. But of course, we know that you can achieve weight more effortlessly and you can experience satiation or a lack of hunger to the point that you naturally miss meals, which was unheard of in a high carb world.
Yeah, you're just waiting, aren't you, for the next rice cake and whatever else you can have.
Absolutely. I used to be that person, and I'm not. I've never needed to lose weight. I've been really lucky, but I was still that person that would have about 3 muesli bars in my handbag, waiting for the time where I could just, open the bag and eat.
Yeah, you're literally just clock watching, aren't you, for the next time?
Absolutely, you are clock watching. It's so true. And of course, if you go anywhere that's outside of your routine, like to the airport or to a meeting, there's always that muesli bar in your bag, in case you get hungry. So low carb comes with this level of freedom from food, and it comes with not having to exercise. And what I really like about this is when I talk about exercise with people now, because I am very holistic in my practice, I talk about exercise in a very different way. So it's really about doing the amount and the type of exercise that's going to make you happy, that's going to keep you fit, that's going to make your bones strong, your bone mineral density strong or robust, and it's going to be sustainable. So it's not exercising for weight loss, it's exercising for health. And I just think it's a better goal to have when you think about exercise. And of course, when people do get injured, it's not the end of the world. It's serious, but it's not the end of the world, because you still have your diet and your diet strategy to help with all these other things. And when I said weight loss is a bonus, it's those other things that you get that I've never heard before in the high carb, low fat way of eating. So it's that reduction of aches and pains and inflammation. It's the more stable mood. It's the improved sleep. It's the weird and wonderful conditions just being tidied up and disappearing, really. It's the level of energy. It's the level of clarity. And a phrase that I hear very, very often is the removal of brain fog. People feel clear-headed, and you do have to wonder how people operate, or how people used to operate in a high carb, low fat space. When they uncover all these benefits, when things are changed. So it really, when you listen to the low carb community, it can sound quite. It can sound quite out there with, it changed my life, it saved my life, it's revolutionary, and it's this and that. And it's actually true. It is actually true. And from a critic, it can sound like an infomercial, but it is absolutely 100% true. And that's why you get people coming out of the woodwork who, I used to be overweight, now I'm slim. I used to have this, and now I haven't got it anymore, that want to take the message and spread it and work in this world and create a job for themselves in this world, because it's immensely satisfying being able to help people along this journey. It's great.
Exactly. And it just, instead of this awful diet that you've got to find motivation from somewhere to maintain because you're just feeling awful all the time, it's this way of eating that is giving you all the benefits and more. So it's just something, that you want to carry on with, as well as being a delicious way of eating. So, I mean, it doesn't feel onerous in any kind of way, does it?
Yeah, I think people can make it onerous. I really think the way to succeed with this way of eating, whether you go low carb or keto, and we might talk about that a little bit later, is really how you view it. It's all, and also with fasting, it's all in the mind. It's all about how you use your brain and your mental stimulus to approach these things, and how you view these things in the context of your world, your social world, and everything that's that surrounds that. Yeah, so it's really just how you view it to allow it to continue in the way that you want it to. Yeah.
And I'd be interested to know a bit about your PhD. You talk about it being about weight loss and maintaining that weight loss. Certainly that's something I've always found hard. I mean, I've lost weight plenty of times. I've been dieting since I was 15, and I've had a progressive upward trend, but it's gone up and down over that time, by having periods of time where I stick to some kind of diet or other. But it's the maintenance that's the problem. Like you said before, it's relatively easy to lose weight, purely by going into an energy deficit, for example. But it's maintaining it, because at some point you stop doing it because it's so awful, and that's when you put the weight back on. So what did you find with looking at the maintenance side of it when you were researching?
Yeah, I mean, weight loss maintenance is the real issue, I think, with all diets or ways of eating, even low carb. I mean, it would be foolish to say once you go low carb, that's it for you, forever, because the studies don't show that. The studies show that actually whatever diet you go on, only a certain, percentage of people actually maintain it, because the foot comes off the brake. You're feeling good, you're looking good, you've ticked off your goal, and life gets in the way. Moving forward.
Oh, I'm absolutely a testament to that, and I am really good at putting on weight extremely quickly.
Yeah.
So I know that's possible.
Yeah, and I think almost when people set goals, they shouldn't necessarily set the goal weight that they want to be or want to get to. It should be the goal weight where they want to get to after they've got there. Do you know what I mean? Like including a maintenance area. So, my PhD, so it was underpinned by, the foundations of nutrition, high carb, low fat, and so there were several studies involved, and one of them was a randomized control trial intervention, but one of the other studies that I did was actually looked at all the private practice dietitians in New Zealand, well, the ones that wanted to be scrutinized, and we looked at their clients that they had been seeing for a 1-year period, and we looked at their outcomes with their clients. And what we found was that about a third of people who lost weight actually kept it off long term, but the rest kind of tracked closer to, back to the beginning. And there were some interesting things that we found in there, including the more frequent your consultation, the better the outcome. We looked at online versus face-to-face, and usually online online tended to be a little bit more helpful because you can have more contact with online. It doesn't have to be, sitting in an office, going through traffic and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more you can do online. But it's that intensity of the support and the intensity of that intervention or contact that really dictates outcomes. So I'll just park that for a minute. So about a third of people. And then we looked at I did an intervention, and I took I worked with an electric company, and I had a group down in Auckland, and I had my control group, which was the same company, but they were based in Whangarei, which was the original place that I moved to when I came to New Zealand. And we put these people on a 12-week program. And from a maintenance perspective, we left the people up north in Whangarei alone for 9 months. We did nothing. And then the people in Auckland, we did these little mini interventions. So they got, to listen to podcasts, and they got little seminars and things. And we looked at the maintenance after 1 year period. And there was very little difference between the two groups. But what we found was, again, that magic number of around a third of people lost weight and kept it off. The intervention that I put together, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed my PhD. I worked with a workplace health company called Vitality Works to do it, and we developed this weight loss program, which was called the Power of 3, and it was about making small changes to 3 areas of your life. So one was eating, one was moving, and one was mindfulness. So they had to choose. We looked at their original diet, and they had to choose 3 things that they would change from each area. So the one would be have a little less pasta for dinner. The other one would be walk a few more steps in your day. And a mindfulness one might be, don't eat when you are in the car or sitting in front of the TV. And then every few weeks, they selected their own set of changes. So even though this was in the context of high carb, low fat, it was still a fabulous intervention. It was based on small changes that people found doable. And it was quite holistic. So I'm still proud of the work that I did, and I don't think that it was useless, even though I've totally changed my nutrition paradigm. But again, a third of people who lost weight kept it off long term, which mirrored the outcomes for the dietitians, and which actually happens to mirror what you find in studies as well, even looking at drugs, even looking at weight loss medication and things. So that magic number of a third is kind of interesting. And that's really at a population level. I think at an individual level, things look a little bit different. If you have people are paying to come and see me in my private practice, and you holding their hand, and with low carb, you tend to, you tend to get better outcomes with low carb. So I don't know what the number would be, whether it's higher than a third, but you tend to get better outcomes because of all those things that I said before. They're not hungry. They're not a slave to food. There are all these other benefits. But again, the psychology and the behavior is still there. You can't escape it. So life gets in the way. And as you know, we live in a toxic food environment. Wherever you turn, there's choice that steers us in the wrong direction. So we can control, but we set up to fail all around us, which is really challenging. Really challenging.
And it's horrendous in some places. I mean, I've just been back to the UK this weekend, and Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall has just done a programme on the BBC called the Fat Fight, I believe, and he's talking about this just bombardment of sweet things in general, chocolate and all the rest of it, round the tills and things like that. And I noticed that when I was in, I think it was WH Smith's, and I was there I bought a couple of books. And, I obviously walked past the chocolate aisle and all the rest of it, but I was at the tills paying, and it is just literally surrounded all in front of you. There are different chocolate bars and offers, and they even ask you when you're paying, oh, well, would you like this bar of dairy milk? Buy one and get one free. And it's just there in your face all the time. And I have to say, in France, it's nowhere near as bad as that. And
right, okay.
It's really hard when you're confronted with it all the time. If those are the kind of foods that really, really tempt you, and someone puts, a great deal in front of you, like you only need to buy one and we're going to give you another one free, it's quite hard to resist, isn't it?
It's very hard. Willpower is a terrible thing, and most people have this battle. We have it here, absolutely, in the supermarkets, but at the service stations, when you go fill up with petrol and you go inside to pay, and they go, will that be all? And it's like, well, yes, it is all. Otherwise, I would have said otherwise. And they go, oh, would you like two of these chocolates for 3 cents or something? No, I wouldn't. But, people just like, oh, what a bargain. Of course, I'll grab that. And they upsell. And it is everywhere. And in fact, yesterday I picked up this little snack pack from a local dairy in Auckland, so a local kind of convenience store, which is en route to schools, right? So kids pass this dairy all the time, and there was a little snack pack, and it had this drink in it with some this colourful, sugary, horrible red stuff. And it had a Chinese label, so I don't even know what it was. And then it had like Oreo cookies, which are these creamy biscuits. And then it had 2 packets of chips, different, like a burger rings and something else. And they were selling it for $2.50 New Zealand. And that's, $2.50. It's just like, oh my God, you can't even buy a litre of milk for $2.50.
Wow.
It was dirt cheap. And I just think, when you actually sit back and think about how we are set up to fail, it actually can be quite disheartening and quite depressing. So it almost pays not to think about that and actually try and control what you can control, because those sorts of things are actually not going to change. You can run up and down and throw your hands in the air and get the world to sign petitions for things, but the reality is that the person who owns the convenience store can do whatever they want to do, and they will do it because they get the money. So it's, again, on a population level, when you look at what's going on around the world and all the temptations, it's depressing. So you can't think about that. You just have to control your environment. And when I mean control your environment, I'm not a zealot. I do believe in treats, and I do believe in embracing the realities of indulgences, but it's the extent to which you do this, and it's also in context with what your goal might be that steers you to that kind of number of things that you might have per week or whatever that you choose. So it's a toxic environment. It's funny, I had a client yesterday who was saying, and they go out for, she's a new mum, and she goes out with other mums for coffee, and she says, that's my treat, is I have a coffee and a slice. And I thought it's the way society builds it up. Why do we have to have a coffee and a something? Why can't we just have a coffee? Or alternatively, why can't we have a coffee and a small handful of almonds? Because they don't sell those kinds of things there. It's interesting. It's eating is ever present. It's everywhere, and it's always encouraged. And that's why I think when you enter into the world of fasting or intermittent fasting, it's a very interesting insight into how we have food shoved down our faces and into our ears, 24/7.
Exactly, and we are pushed to just snack all the time. I don't need a snack with my coffee because I've had breakfast and I'll be having lunch later. I don't need something else in between.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the psychology of it is fascinating, and I don't even think I fully understand it. And my eating is mostly beautiful, but not always. And I know that when I work at home, I'm into the fridge and the cupboard all the time. Okay, so I don't keep bad stuff in there. Because I'll just eat it. I know it. But I overeat good stuff. So, I'm doing some work, and then I'll, go upstairs to the kitchen and have some, nut butter on a piece of cheese, and then I'll have a few more of them, and I'll come down, and then half an hour later I'll go up, have a cup of tea and have a few more. And I'm not hungry. I don't need them. But that satisfaction of eating food is very interesting. And I think people need to be made aware or think a bit more carefully about their food environment. And I know that when I work at home, I overeat, so I limit the amount of time that I work at home. And I acknowledge that a bit of overeating when I work at home, for whatever reason, is okay in the context of my world. So it's just fascinating looking at the psychology and the behavior that goes with eating. Because, of course, if we all ate just to fuel ourselves, we wouldn't have a big problem. And I was thinking about this the other day. If we lost our sense of smell, I think everyone would eat a whole lot less. Because,
I know. I've known a couple of people who have for some reason, and all the pleasure goes out of eating because they can't taste anything.
Yeah.
They completely changed their way of eating. A woman I used to work with years ago in the garden centre in the UK, she ate for other things like texture.
Yes.
So she mixed textures to get some excitement and pleasure in her food because she could get nothing from taste. So it was all about things like colour and texture because that's all she had to work with.
Yeah, I do wonder how my intake would change. I would definitely still eat low carb because I know it's better for me internally. But I don't suspect I would snack because I think my snacking is really all about the taste of almond butter,
Me too. And I'm so glad to hear you say that because I'm exactly the same. When I'm working from home, I definitely eat more and graze. But
yeah.
I tell you what's made the difference for me on that score is that I've been determined to set up a regular routine of fasting for a while now. And I started last week, this is my second week into it, where I fast on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. And each one ends up being about 36 hours because I go from the preceding evening through to the following eating day's lunchtime. So it's, a decent length fast. And what I found is, one, it completely got rid of my Coke Zero addiction.
Oh, brilliant.
which has reared up again, and I've been trying to get rid of for ages and haven't been able to. It did it almost immediately. But also I found that the snacking has got less when I'm at home because I'm very picky too, and I don't really know why, but it has, which I'm very thankful for.
Well, so here's the thing. And I would absolutely 100% agree with you. I think the beauty about fasting is when you know you're going to fast, like today I'm fasting, it becomes a rule. And even when I'm working at home and if I'm having a fasting day, I don't snack because it's because I'm fasting. But if I'm not fasting, it's like a free-for-all. And I think that is one of the beauties about fasting is that you don't have to think about what you're going to have or how much you're going to have and when you're going to have it and how many calories and how many grams of carbs.
Just having nothing.
you just have nothing. So it's it's a non-negotiable. And that can be very helpful for people who are in challenging food environments. And interestingly, when I did my 3-day fast, so I was just experimenting with it purely because I do everything before I tell my clients to do things, and also just to experience what it was like. And I I did it. I was we went up north to our little beach house up north, and I was working from there for the week. And for those 3 days, my workspace, because it's a little place, is right next is in the kitchen, really, because our kitchen sort of lounge is one area. And I was working pretty much in the kitchen, which is right next to the pantry. But because I was on this 3-day fast, there was no temptation there. It was fascinating. So I think once you have made up your mind and once you have the rule, and here's the key, once you actually go, food is off limits, then it's like, well, if you think about it, that's unproductive thought. So turn your thoughts and your energies into what you are doing. Don't think about food because you're not having it. End of story. So it sort of can be quite black and white. And the first time or the second time you do it, you might battle with those thoughts. But
I was going to say it's definitely a battle of wills when I started, but I have noticed it's getting easiasier, and with the regularity.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is it's a fascinating psychology, fasting. That's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, I think doing like a time restricted eating like yours, like an 18 hours or something, and what we've come up with in our new book, What the Fast, called super fasting, which is 2 lots of 24 hours in a row. So like Sunday night to Monday night, and then have a dinner, have a nice, beautiful, nutrient-rich dinner, and then repeat it again on Tuesday. So fast on Tuesday and have a beautiful dinner on Tuesday night. I think that's quite doable, particularly if you are working in a busy job and you have dinner, because you know that dinner is going to be it's going to be there, so you can kind of hang in for the day. Like missing breakfast is easy. It probably gets a bit challenging maybe mid-morning or maybe mid-afternoon, and then it's like, I can just hang on till dinner. So it's very doable for people, whereas missing dinner can be quite a challenge, particularly if you've got to cook it for the rest of your family.
Oh, exactly. That's the benefit I have, that I live alone, so I can completely control. If I had to cook dinner for other people, there's no way I could do it. But that knowing that you haven't got to go too long before you can eat again, that's helped me actually. Now, when I'm feeling hungry, particularly at dinner time, is the difficult time. But knowing, you've only got to hang out till tomorrow, and then lunchtime, lovely bacon and eggs. It's not too long to wait. And I wonder also, we're talking about we're both both snack monsters a bit. I wonder if actually having some days where you're fasting actually balances out those days if you do find you're a bit of a snacker. Because, we know, don't we, that if you eat regularly, you're constantly spiking your insulin, and that has some impact. Mm-hmm. But if you're counterbalancing that with fasting days where you're not spiking your insulin at all, I wonder if it helps balance it out a bit.
You mean overall insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity? That's an interesting question. I don't know, but I think that people need to be very, very careful that they don't use fasting as an excuse to overeat or to eat poor quality food the other time. And I think there is an element of feeling virtuous when you fast, and that sort of gives you the license to have a little bit more of the food that you would normally eat or that you would not normally eat, because you've I've been fasting. So I think we need to be very, very careful there, because what we don't want to see is going from a stable blood sugar, reduced insulin, to the opposite, which is just everything all over the show. Of course, if you're snacking on low carb foods, and my snacking is certainly like I said, some a bit of peanut butter or nut butter on some cheese, or might be a little bottle of yogurt with some grain-free granola on it.
Oh, absolutely. Same here. It's all low-carb foods.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, I found my appetite reduced on eating days, which I didn't necessarily expect.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I think for me personally, I think it might have something to do with the weight loss surgery I had, although it was quite a long time ago. So I think it sort of dials back in the restriction a bit. I think maybe it has something to do with that. But yes, interesting. I was just wanted to go back briefly, and there probably isn't an answer to this, but that third of people who manage to lose weight and maintain that weight loss, what's special about them? Is there anything, that always seems to be the case? I assume there may be, this group of super adherers or something, but is there something particular that they do or they can do that other people can't?
There wasn't, I can't recall if anything came out of my PhD work, but we have done some work. We did some work several years ago. A master's student of mine did some work with some menopausal women, and put them on an 8-week, I think, or 12-week low carb eating pattern or plan. It wasn't a prescribed plan. It was like eat more of this and eat less of that. And this was there was no control group. It was a translational study. Like, let's see how this plays out. And it had a really good qualitative component. So it looked at what were the barriers, what were the enhancers, and let's look at what happens with your weight. And the ones that had more success and greater adherence had definitely had more support. So support by spouses and friends and family is a massive determinant of whether you're going to succeed long term. And I think that can apply to any age group. But of course, it's most evident when you're dealing with kids, because of course families feed their kids. So if you don't have the support of the mum and the dad and the brother and the sister, then it's just a lost cause, because you'll do something for 12 weeks and then it's like, oh, end of the study, and now I can go eat what they're eating. So if you don't have the support, you're in trouble. There's also a massive database called the National Weight Control Registry, and this is a group in the US that have been collecting data on hundreds of thousands of people that have lost weight and kept it off. And the criteria to enter the database is that you have to, I can't recall the exact figures, but you have to have lost a certain percentage of your weight and have to have kept it off for 1 year to be part of this database. And they've done several studies on the outcomes. And what they found, two things that come through quite strongly with this group, is that those that have been more successful tend to be the ones that regularly weigh themselves, and that regularly check in with their food monitoring. So I know a lot of people don't like scales, and they don't like writing down what they eat or putting it into apps. But we find through this research and in my practice as well that regular weight monitoring and coming back to putting your food into an app every now and again to keep you honest, to rein you in, just keeps you on the straight and narrow. I think once you lose weight, you will always have to think about it. It will always be there. So I think if you think that it's going to go away, I've hit my goal weight and everything's going to be hunky-dory from now on, you're dreaming. You constantly have to be mindful. And that's not a bad thing. It's just how it is, and people need to acknowledge that. I always get my clients to, when they lose weight, we come up with a target range, where they can sit in, because of course your weight fluctuates every single day. So settling on 71.8 is not going to work. So we come up with a range, and I get them to weigh themselves regularly, and the word regularly is very different for different people. But when they come to the top of their range and they go over that and they don't hear warning bells, they need to call me. And that's when they can come in, we can have a chat, and the chat's with me. I don't tell them anything new. It's more of a support. It's a reset. Let's get back to basics. Let's get your good habits back, and usually it's, I'm a bit less organized, I'm really busy at work, or I don't have much me time. And so we talk through those things and bring people back and rein them in. So I think it's a very healthy way of making sure that your weight doesn't return by having these built-in alarm bells that you might see at a certain point, that certain threshold where your weight sits. Yeah.
It's catching it before it starts going too far, because there's certainly, with me, if I ignore those early warning bells, like you say, and it goes past a certain point, it sort of becomes I might as well just let it go now. And you just kind of start the slide, and it gets more and more difficult to put it back in. So if you can have that point that you need to start doing something before it gets to the point where you're really, really depressed about it.
Totally. It's that procrastination, which is not good. And, it's really interesting when you have a period of time where you don't exercise, or where you're not eating brilliantly, to get back on the horse is quite tricky. And, you can come up with any behavioral mechanisms, any triggers that you want. But I always come back to one of my favorite logos that I can think of, and it's the Nike logo, the swoosh, the tick. And I think that logo it's so simple, and it is so powerful, because it means just do it. And sometimes you can talk yourself, black and blue about why you should do something, but actually you just do it. And then when you do something, and you keep doing it, it will become habitual. And then once it's habitual, it's easy. It becomes easy. So it's that, if you want to become a morning exerciser, and you can talk yourself around it, and it's too cold, and it's too this. It's like, just do it, and then you do it for a few weeks, and you might not enjoy it at the start, but then it becomes habitual, and then you find that you actually do enjoy it, and it plays out quite well. And I know this doesn't apply to everyone, because everyone's got very different strategies, but I always think back to the Nike swoosh. I think they are geniuses for coming up with a logo like that.
Exactly. No, that's so true. It's often just a case of getting through that initial pain period, isn't it? Until, like you say, it starts to become habit, and you start to realize that you actually quite enjoy it.
Yeah. And, Daisy, just on your other point about what is common to the people who have success, I also think there's a range of personalities that you get with this. And I think some people, you can just tell them what to do, and they'll do it. And they'll do it forever. And I have some clients that I think that what they're doing is too restrictive, and I think they'll fall off, but they don't. So by having a treat for some people, that is not good, because that makes them fall off. So they work out that by needing to be restrictive is how they're going to achieve their goals, and they can stick to it no problem. So I think really one of my strengths is that I'm able to read my clients quite well, and I'm able to work with them in whichever way that it needs to happen. I very rarely tell people what I think they should do. I let them come up with what they believe will work for them, and I help guide them, of course. But I think you need that intuition. You need to be able to really, really listen to someone, to work with them to achieve their goals, whatever that might be.
Exactly. So you don't have a standard approach. You tailor your approach to each person that comes through your door.
Yeah, and I do think, I am biased towards low carb, but it's a healthy bias, because I've been biased against low carb for most of my career. So I actually don't think it's a bias at all. It's actually looking at the practice and the evidence, and working with the best scenario. But within low carb, there is incredible variation as to how you can work. And And I think what people don't realize is that there is a spectrum of carb, and it's lower carb. It depends on where you come from. If you come from 500 grams of carbs a day, then 200 grams can be low carb for you. If you come from 100 grams of carbs, then maybe keto is for you, getting a little bit more extreme and restrictive. So there is a spectrum, and I think working, again, reading people and seeing how they operate in social circumstances and when they go away on holiday and things like that, you can get a sense of where they need to be within the spectrum. And of course, you could work within, you could operate within cycles within the spectrum. So our super fasting protocol is really awesome for that, because it gets you into ketosis when you are on your fasting days, and then you come out of ketosis with your low carb days, and then you might have a treat on the weekend and embrace realities, and then you can cycle back into ketosis the next week. So you get to experience the health benefits of being in ketosis. You get the benefits of actually just eating low carb and not being super restrictive, and you also get the benefits of taking the foot off the brake when you need to. And I think that's something that people are seeking out, because it can be very black and white, and people do drop off.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much grey in between, and you need to embrace that, don't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you find with the women who come to see you, there is a particular group of women and or particular issues they come to you with? I mean,
I'll have to say that, I get a wide range of clients, ranging from, young athletes to elderly people wanting to control their diabetes. But I do get a lot of middle-aged women who have battled with weight their whole life. And it's interesting, because when I first got into low carb, people would come to me and I would have to tell them all about low carb, and we'd sort of start from scratch, right? And now, 6 years down the track, I get a lot of women who are coming to me and they're already doing low carb, but they have got some results, but they're stuck and they don't know what to do from there. And it's quite freeing, actually, because then I don't have to convince them about low carb or keep on, you don't have to talk to them for hours about, insulin and all that kind of stuff. You can just actually work on the nitty-gritty details of what they can do. And a lot of the time, it's people overeating delicious foods like nuts and like cheese, and particularly putting cream in their coffee. Because these foods have been liberated now, and that's when I come back to energy balance. And I do think that there is a very, very big difference between energy balance dynamics when you are a high carb, low fat person and when you are a low carb, high fat or healthy fat person. The dynamics are very different, because you're not taking into consideration the whole hormonal milieu of the body. But when you are low carb, and you overeat calories, they're not going to magically disappear. So it's about I hate using the word control, but it's true. It's about controlling those calories, and that's where I think fasting really comes into its own, because if you've got some days of the week where you're not eating at all, and other days where you're eating but not in a very restrictive way, that can be very beneficial for overall calorie balance over the week. So that's a clientele that I see. Another part of my clientele is menopausal. So around menopause is a really tricky time for people, and you get the stubborn fat, which is hard to move, and you get all the things that go with that. So there's a bit of work around that. And then there's another group of people I see who are doing everything right, but are still not getting anywhere. And it's really to do with their hormones being all over the show, particularly in relation to stress. And I think stress is a real demon. And we know very little about it's kind of intangible because we know that it's bad. We know that it affects things negatively. We also know that a little bit of stress is really good. So it's the chronic stress that is really quite damaging. And what's most damaging about that is people think that they are not stressed, but actually there are things that occur in people's lives and that have occurred in people's lives that can contribute to this underlying stress that doesn't manifest on a daily, panic basis, like the death of a loved one, or an animal, or something which you had a real struggle with that just kind of sits there and impacts things and causes stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline to be a little bit messy, and that causes a high internal glucose environment. So while you are eating low carb, your internal environment says that you are high carb because of the glucose. So there's a lot of that I see. So a lot of talk goes into managing stress. I think it's really naive for people to say we need to decrease your stress, because that's sometimes impossible to do. But it's not.
I was going to say, yeah. I've seen so many people who say that they have all these stresses, and the obvious thing is to reduce that, but it's just not always possible, is it?
No, it's not.
What can people do to? Well, it's
not about decreasing your stress. It's about becoming resilient and managing your stress well. And I think a resilient person is able to have an internal environment in the body, a hormone environment, a neurotransmitter environment that is healthy, by being resilient and managing your stress well. And that means very different things to different people. And sometimes you can criticize people for sitting in front of the TV for 2 hours a night, but actually that is their de-stressing period. They get up at 5 a.m. and they're running around and they're damage controlling, and they do a bit of exercise, so they're not unhealthy, but they want to come home and just vegetate in front of some mindless TV program. And what's wrong with that? Nothing, if that's helpful. Some people find that just, meditation. Like for me, for example, if you tell me to meditate or to, light a candle and put my feet up against the wall for 20 minutes a day, it's just not going to happen. But I know that if I go into my special beach, whatever the weather, if it's pouring with rain, it's as liberating as if it's beautifully sunny. And if I'm walking or running on the beach, if I'm in that beautiful environment, it just grounds me. And that grounding is my de-stressor. And I don't have to necessarily be alone, but it's that environment that is so powerful for me as a grounding agent or de-stressor. So I think everyone needs to find out what it is that helps them, and then try and integrate that into their lives when they can, as regularly as possible. And it's no good saying, oh, yeah, my de-stress is when I go on holiday once a year. No. We need it regularly. We need to make sure that you are having your me time or de-stressing more regularly than once a year. So working with people to help them find out what it is that makes them more resilient to handle their stress better is a really is a massive key to unlocking those kind of lasting secrets of weight loss in the context of when you're doing low carb and everything else is under control.
Exactly, and to find a way to make sure you take that time. I was talking to someone the other day who, listed all these different reasons she was stressed, and when different people in the group suggested different ways that maybe would help, and she just didn't have the time, and she had stress coming from her work, stress coming from her husband making demands, stress coming from her children making demands, her family, her health, all sorts of things, and she almost just didn't have the time to do anything that would help her. But I think women, it seems in particular, have it coming from so many different directions that at some point they have to insist, if they're in that environment, that there is some time that they take out for themselves.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I see a lot of people, a lot of amazing women who do everything to care for those around them. So their husbands and their children and their friends and all that kind of stuff. They do amazing things, but it's to their detriment, to the detriment of their health. And I think it takes a strong person to actually say, no, I am going to need some time for myself. And it's putting yourself first, not all the time, but putting yourself first from time to time. Because I really believe if the matriarch, the woman of the house is not in good shape, mentally or physically, how can they look after everyone to the level that, that shows optimal health for the rest of them? So
exactly, it's actually in everyone else's benefit for her to take time for herself.
Totally, and I know. I hope this doesn't upset any people who are listening, but I see this with nurses a lot, and I have incredible respect for nurses, because the type of work that nurses do is just absolutely admirable, and not everyone can do that kind of work. They give so much, and some of the work is not great. It's not it's not that pleasant, but they are so giving, and I see a lot of nurses that are in really bad shape themselves, physically, and I wonder if it's that nurturing, giving, amazing personality that they give to the people that they look after, and they've got nothing left for themselves, and it's a real shame, and I don't know how to change that, but yeah, I see that very often.
It is a real shame, and like you say, it's often the people who give the most who end up in problems themselves, and that just seems so unfair.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying be a selfish person by any stretch, but it's finding the balance between looking after yourself amidst looking after everyone around you.
And ultimately, it's not being selfish, because, like you said before, taking care of yourself enables you to take care of the people you need to take care of better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's what I believe. Absolutely. Yeah. And sleep is incredibly important as well, which is under acknowledged as a contributor to health. And when your sleep is compromised and you're tired and you're grumpy and you make poor choices, and it sort of spirals from there. So looking at becoming resilient is sleep, getting good amounts of sleep is part of that. And if, when you get to the area or the time of your life around menopause and sleep is disrupted, then it might actually be trying to make time during the day to have, 20-minute power naps just to regenerate. So there are ways and means that you can capture little snippets of sleep if you can't manage to get a good 8 hours uninterrupted overnight.
That's why it's so important, isn't it, to look at everything, because the tendency is just to focus solely on what you're eating and to put all the blame on that if things are going wrong, and to put all the weight on that to solve all your problems. But often it can it can be all these other things that are impacting just as much, if not more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
Gosh, there are so many things that I'd love to keep talking with you about all night and all day in your time zone, but we're gonna have to bring it to a close here. And
because you need your sleep. You need to get your sleep.
Yes, exactly. And how I like to do that is to get a top tip from you to our listeners.
Right. So my top tip is know your why. So really understand why you are doing what you are doing. And I think if you can really understand and knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, it'll make things play out in a more straightforward way. And this relates to low carb. It relates to whether you want to do keto, why are you doing keto, why are you doing fasting. Understand why you're doing it, and the rest will follow.
Yes, and it's good, isn't it, to have that. When you know your why, it really helps with the motivation to keep going.
Absolutely, totally.
Fantastic advice, and gosh, that show has been packed full of so much information that it's funny. As we were going along, I have quite a large Facebook group, and there were names that kept popping into my mind of particular people that I was thinking about when I was asking some of the questions and listening to some of the things you were saying. So I just know that so many people are going to get real benefit from this podcast.
Oh, that's
Thank
fabulous.
You so much, Caryn. It's been brilliant.
You're welcome. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you very much. To get the resources and links from the show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. If you fancy joining me on this exciting adventure and want to help me create new episodes, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It's thanks to the two keto dudes that I'm hosting this podcast. So please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. Please help other people hear about and find this podcast by reviewing the show on iTunes and Facebook. Every star and review really does help. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. This week's end quote is an old Maori proverb. I'm not going to mangle the original, but you can find it in the show notes. Here is the English translation. Turn your face to the sun and the shadows will fall behind you. Bye-bye, keto lovelies.